Hi, Mason. How are you?
Hello, Michael. How are you? Pretty good.
Oh, I'm doing very well.
Cool. I hope you actually skipped through the questions.
I did. I skimmed through some of the questions. Yes. I didn't. I mean, I like to kind of go more a little offhand, improvise. So I don't like to spend too much time thinking about it because a lot of times I just go offhand. I did skim through a lot of the questions. I mean, I have them with me here, but I thought we'd go a little more offhand and improvise a little bit. But yeah, I did skim through some of the questions.
Sure. Of course, that I mean in that case it sounds, more authentic because it is spontaneous and more natural.
That's what I was aiming for. So I mean, I skimmed through them, but I didn't think too deeply about the questions because yeah, more for authenticity. And it sounds a lot more natural if you just go a little offhand.
Okay. Fantastic. So, without losing any time, let's dive into the questions then.
Oh, absolutely. All right, I'm in.
Nice. So, teacher Michael,
Uh huh.
speaking of motivation, how can we motivate language learners?
In a lot of different ways. I think it depends a lot on their age and their aims. So, for example, when I started out teaching English, teaching ESL, I was teaching young learners, elementary school kids, age 8 through 12, and children are a lot different. So you have to be very goofy. They respond a lot to games, and to little competitions. So they really love games, and that's how you're gonna get them to participate and get them motivated. All right, if we could study this, I'm gonna have a lot more fun. So you gotta give them a reward system with children. Um, with adults, I notice a lot of times they are self motivated in a sense that so for example, I teach in Dubai, and if you come to Dubai, it's basically you're gonna have to know English if you want to get a job. Maybe not every job, but it's going to be very helpful in finding a job. Be very helpful in entering university. So with adults, I notice a lot of times they're already self motivated. I'm coming to this English class because I need to get a job or I need to enter university. So that makes my job a lot easier because I don't have to. I mean, obviously, I try to make my classes engaging as possible, but they already come in with the motivation.
Hmm.
Um, so, but sometimes you just got to remind them of that, or there's certain areas where they might start to get a little bored, but you need to remind them why this is important and how it'll be helpful. Um, Studying grammar, it might be boring, but it's going to be very helpful because this is how people are going to judge you when you're sending emails or when you're speaking to people. If you're applying for a job, having the right grammar is going to put you above somebody whose grammar is a little lower. So sometimes you need to remind them of those things, and they usually get it, and that gets them back on track because they already see the importance in learning English and why they need it. And sometimes you have to remind them, all right, this is why vocabulary is important. This is why grammar is important. And with vocabulary, yeah, you don't need to use it yourself, but when you're speaking, if you're sitting in a meeting, if you're having a conversation with somebody, you need to keep up. So sometimes you just have to remind them of those things. So with adults, you can talk to them a little more personally. With kids, you got to just get them laughing, get them motivated. So it really just depends on the age.
Fantastic. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. What is the difference between young learners and adults? Obviously, you answered it a little bit,
Yeah, I mean,
but
I
if you
mean, I,
want, you
I,
can add some more.
I touched on that. But yes, with young learners, you can't communicate with them the same way, saying, "Oh well, English is obviously important to get into university or get a job," because I mean they're just kids. So you got to play a lot of games. You need to make sure that it's always very high energy, because otherwise they lose interest. So it takes a lot more energy keeping the interest of young learners. It takes a lot more energy when it comes to classroom management because behavior is always an issue. Getting them to sit still, sit in their seats. I mean, kids they fight with each other, so sometimes you have to manage that because you try to make it competitive so it would be fun, but ultimately sometimes that leads to bad feelings. Sometimes they fight. One of them might start crying. They're very young. So dealing with that classroom management that you don't have to deal with so much with adults. Sometimes you do with adults. You'd be surprised.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
but that seems to happen a lot more often with children dealing with classroom management. And yeah, you just got to change your persona. So it's very high energy when you're teaching kids. You have to have a very high level energy. Dancing, singing, being funny. You have to be goofy. Versus adults, you can be taken a little more seriously. Still have fun, but you don't have to worry as much about classroom management. Would be a big thing.
Exactly, exactly. Very nice. Okay, it says here, what are the probable problems of students while they are studying and learning?
Um, I mean, so now I'm just thinking about that one on the spot. I mean, there's all sorts of problems you could come across. Um, One of the ones in terms of vocabulary, I was talking to my students about this tonight. I just finished a class a short while ago. When it comes to learning vocabulary, the big thing is that you forget. You learn a word and then you just quickly forget it. And a lot of times that comes. I was using the example tonight. A lot of students will just check the answer on their phone and or use their translator on their phone and they go, okay, and keep reading or keep going, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't register. So that's a common problem you can deal with students when it comes to particular vocabulary. Things don't always register. Things don't always stick. You can ask them in the next day. All right, well, what does this word mean? Use this word in a sentence, and they forgot. Um, so that can be a problem. Retaining information, but that's going to come through studying and through practice. So you can overcome that through practice and through study and through immersing yourself in the language. But yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I was just talking to my students about that in my last class, the importance of retaining information.
Yes, very nice. Okay, very general question here. What sort of material would you recommend them to use? Books,
Uh,
apps, websites, other interactive, platforms, whatever.
for one thing, I always recommend videos. I mean, YouTube can actually be a great thing. Finding clips tonight in my class. I'm teaching adults, and we're working a lot with conversation. Tonight in my class, we were talking about books, movies, and films. I kind of put that all into one category. Um, and when it comes to TV shows, I would say one thing that's great is first of all, okay, you can use YouTube, Netflix. And tonight I was actually playing some clips from the TV show Ellen, the talk show. I just downloaded it in because at least with that show, it's a talk show and they do games, trivia games and different kind of games. So a TV show that you can get involved in. So like a quiz show or some type of show that you could think and you could try to answer as well. Um, those kind of TV shows are super helpful. So TV shows in general, but particularly a talk show or a game show where you can get involved in and interact. So something a little more interactive can be great. In the class before, I was recommending some books. A big book like a novel is just tough for a lot of students. No one's going to get through. I have one right here. I just started this today, but I mean, this is going to be a lot for a student to. I mean, it's so many words, and they're going
To
to get ahead.
digest, actually.
I suggested some graphic novels. These, I mean, they're basically just very long comic books, but the text is a lot shorter, so it's a lot easier to digest because there's pictures and text. But there's a lot less text, but enough that you can learn some vocabulary and improve your reading skills and vocabulary skills. So it's a little bit lighter. Or sometimes I just recommend, you know what? You can read books that are aimed at young learners. because it's a second language, so there's no reason to feel embarrassed about it. So, for example, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. All right, for native English speakers, yeah, people read that when they're 11, 12 years old. Um, but if you're learning a language, that could be a good book to read. Um, John Grisham has a whole series for young learners, for young teens, Theodore Boone, and the language is a little lighter, so it's easier to digest. So I recommend reading a lot. That gets overlooked. Or if you don't want to read a book, magazines and newspapers. Find a magazine you like on a topic that you enjoy. If you enjoy sports or the outdoors or fashion or cooking, there's magazines related to pretty much any topic you'd be interested in. So I don't have a particular recommendation on a magazine. Just pick something, whatever you enjoy. If you like sports, get a sports magazine. If you like fashion, there you go. And then there's short articles. But that's one that gets overlooked a lot. I would say reading is a great way to improve your vocabulary. So yeah, that's a big one that I recommend.
Thank you very much. And the question here says grammar or vocabulary, which one is important? Or let's say which one outweighs the other one and
Mm-hmm.
why? And also, how can learners improve these two different, things? Yeah.
So I would actually say right away, vocabulary is far more important. That doesn't mean that grammar is not important. But I say once you've learned grammar to an intermediate level, um, at that point, vocabulary becomes far more important. Because grammar matters when you're trying to structure sentences together. But once you get to higher levels, all you're really doing is repeating the grammar points that you probably learned at lower levels, at beginner, pre-intermediate, and intermediate levels. By the time you get to an advanced level, all you're really doing is just reviewing a few things. Because even native speakers make mistakes when they're using grammar, or like certain things. When you're teaching grammar at an advanced level, you have to teach the past simple and the past perfect. Um, Now, a lot of native speakers will just use the past simple, even if it's wrong. Oh, they should have used the past perfect there, but it's easy enough just to use the past simple when you're speaking. So, I mean, there's certain things, or sometimes even hypotheticals. Um, you're supposed to say, I wish I had gone to the party. But a lot of native speakers just say, I wish I went to the party. Even though grammatically it's wrong, academically it's wrong, should be had gone. So I mean, there's certain grammar points that just get overlooked anyways, even by native speakers. But vocabulary is huge. The only way you're really going to learn, keep up in a conversation, be able to express yourself is through vocabulary. So the more synonyms you know, the more you'll be able to communicate with other people. Um, and we talk about the English language. I mean, certainly there's, I don't even know how many words at this point, but synonyms is big as well. Being able to use synonyms, because every word has a number of synonyms. But if you're trying to understand someone in a conversation, grammar is going to be less important. If you want to know what the person is talking about, you need to have vocabulary so you can hear. You might not use those words yourself, but when you're hearing, you need to understand it. So when it comes to comprehension, listening comprehension, reading comprehension, vocabulary is going to be huge. And even with speaking and writing, you still have to show that you have a wide range of vocabulary when you're expressing yourself as well. So it's going to make it a lot easier to express yourself, going to make it a lot easier to comprehend other people when you're listening or when you're reading. Yeah, grammar matters, but I would say vocabulary is far more important. If that's the question, which one's more important? Um, from this teacher's perspective, um, clearly vocabulary.
Nice. Very nice, of course. Oh my God, there's a silly question here asking it from a native speaker.
Okay.
How did you personally learn English?
Just through practice. Growing up. Yeah, it's my native language. Um,
Of course. So, where are you originally from?
from the United States. um, from the state of New Hampshire, to be specific. Anyone that wouldn't know New Hampshire, most people wouldn't if they're not from the United States. If you do, I'm impressed. But I usually tell people I'm from the greater Boston area. It's not too far from Boston. Um, I'll tell people from the Boston area, but officially New Hampshire.
Very nice. Okay. So, is it possible to learn multiple languages at the same time? And would you recommend that?
Um, Definitely it's possible. We know that. Would I recommend it? It's hard to say because there's certain languages that might have a lot of similar roots. So, for example, Spanish and Italian have a lot of the similar roots. So, if you learn one, it's sometimes a lot easier to learn the other. Um, if it's a young learner, yes. I mean, that would be kind of up to the parents because a lot of sometimes parents want their children to learn multiple languages. That'd probably be a lot easier to do um, when you're very young. And then as you get older, it's hard to say I would recommend that they learn them simultaneously because a lot of times um, you might get to an intermediate level in one language before you start learning another because you can't really say, "Oh, I learned it," because you're always continuing to learn. Um, but for example, in Dubai, at the institute that I teach at, people go there to learn all different languages: English, Arabic, German, French. Um, but a lot of the other languages are actually taught in English. So, for example, if you're trying to learn French, they might explain using English. So you need to know English in order to learn the other language. So if your native language is Arabic and you take a French class, a lot of times explanations will actually be in English. So you kind of learn a third language through a second language. So your English would have to be at a certain level. I mean, that's here in Dubai to be able to understand the next language. So I definitely wouldn't say it's a bad idea. For some people, it might be better to just focus on one language. If they need that second language, then perhaps it could be a good idea. Or sometimes it's always fun just to learn a few basics in any language, because that might make learning your main language, the one you're focusing on, a little bit easier. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say would I recommend it. Oh, maybe yes, maybe no. Definitely, I wouldn't say it's a bad idea. I wouldn't tell anybody don't do it. It really depends on what your goals are and your reasons for learning the language.
Very good. Okay, have you ever tried that personally?
Um, I have not. I have not personally. I'll be honest. Actually, I only speak English. It's actually the only language that I've learned. So I don't. I took French in high school. I took a semester of German when I got to university. But that didn't stick. Um, I learned a little bit of French, beginner level French. That was back in high school. And then one semester of German in college. That was pretty tough. But at the same time, I do understand when people are learning English for myself, and I'm only speaking English to them, um, how difficult it could be. Um, so yeah, I guess I didn't really. I mean, that was the closest thing because in university I started learning German for one semester, and it was so tough that I went back to French. Because in my university I had to do at least I think 2 semesters of a language. Um, so I thought, you know what, I did French in high school. I learned German. Got to be really tough. I was like, I'm going back to French. Um, so no, I haven't really tried it myself too much in that regard.
Okay, cool. Uh, it says that how can learners improve their speaking abilities? Very cliche question.
Yes, it is. And it's kind of a cliche answer as well. You've got to get involved. Um, Conversation classes help. I would recommend a conversation class if anybody can. Um, you can also just find groups out there. People always say, "Oh, I don't have a speaking partner. I don't have anybody to speak with." But I mean, there's the internet as well. When I hear that, "Oh, I don't have anybody to practice my speaking with," I always think, "Well, how hard are you really looking?" You can go online. You can, I mean, there's groups all over the place. You can just Google it. Um, and in people's cities, there's always, I mean, I say that, of course, in Dubai, everyone speaks English, but no matter what city you're in, I feel that there's an opportunity to practice your speaking skills. Um, so that's pretty much it. How do you improve your speaking skills? How can a learner improve their speaking abilities? Through practice. You've got to involve yourself and immerse yourself, as opposed to people that just give one word answers. Think about that when you're in a conversation class. Contribute as much as you can. Speak as much as possible. Don't be shy. Try to avoid those one word short answers. People will ask you something like, "So, what are your hobbies?" And they'll just say, "I like cooking," and just stop there. It's like, no, no, tell me more. Okay, you like cooking. What do you like to cook? What have you cooked recently? How often? Give me more details. So you've really got to immerse yourself and push yourself, push yourself to speak as much as possible. So instead of just giving a basic answer, push yourself to give a more detailed answer.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Uh, it says here accent and pronunciation. Yeah, of course they are so different. But what do you think about these stuff? Then I will ask the second question.
All right. So when it comes to that, I have students here in Dubai that tell me a lot that they want to get rid of their accent. And I think that's ridiculous, to be honest. Um, for starters, right away, your accent is part of your identity. It's part of who you are. So to want to get rid of that seems very silly to me, frankly. Also, I mean, there's no shame in having an accent. It's just where you're from. I have an American accent, but what is an American accent? There's New York, there's Boston, Southern accent, even out west they have a bit of an accent. So what is an American accent? No matter where you're from, particularly if it's or actually it doesn't even matter. Um, in a country, there's every region has a different accent. You go to England, a British accent, but people in Britain know, oh, he's from Manchester, he's from Oxford, or they can tell as well. So I don't understand the whole I want to get rid of my accent thing. Pronunciation is different, because you need to have clear pronunciation. So I could understand that, because sometimes that could lead to confusion in a conversation, or if somebody just can't understand you, you need to speak clearly. But when I speak to a French person or a German person or Russian, yeah, they have different accents, but I can understand them when they're speaking. So it's not the accent, it's speaking with clear pronunciation that's important. I think accents are actually pretty cool. So when someone says that they want to get rid of it, I think, well, that's very unfortunate. Why would you want to do that? Again, it's part of your identity. It's part of who you are. Uh, so
Cool.
that's what I would say to that.
Very nice. Very nice. Exactly. And students ask this question a lot: American English or British English? Which one actually they have to choose? What do you think about this question?
I try to teach both when I can. Of course, I am an American, but living in Dubai for as long as I have, we generally the books that we use and the English they use here is British English. So I kind of use a mix of American English and British English now. So, for example, I notice even myself, sometimes I say at the weekend, sometimes I say on the weekend. When I'm writing on the board, sometimes when I spell color or favorite or neighbor, I add a U, sometimes I don't. Um, So there's certain things in terms of grammar, in terms of spelling. Um, I teach my students that both are acceptable. I mean, vocabulary is another big one. With vocabulary, it could become confusing. Um, for example, a biscuit or a cookie, fries or chips. Um, it can become a bit confusing depending on what you're talking about. So I try to teach my students both. Let them choose what they're more comfortable with. So it's up to the student. I teach a lot of IELTS preparation. I just say, all right, well, just remember, you could use American English, you could use British English, but you've got to stay consistent. So if you use American English, you have to use it the whole time. If you use British English, you have to use it the whole time. You can't mix them. But that would be just be with spelling and with grammar and with certain words. My family is versus my family are. All right, if you're going to choose the British English, you got to stay consistent through the whole test if you're doing IELTS, or you can do American English, you just stay consistent. So generally, when I try to teach both to my students, um, and let them choose what they feel more comfortable with. So
Very nice. Hmm. So,
yeah, I was gonna say that was pretty much. I just let them choose what they want. Um, there's certainly not in this teacher's opinion not one that's better than the other. It's
exactly.
dealer's choice. That's what I like to say. Dealer's choice.
Yes, definitely correct. And okay, is it possible to learn English without going abroad?
Absolutely, people do it all the time. Um, frankly, now people think that. I mean, I suppose if you have the opportunity to do it, but there's a lot of logistics that come along with that. You need to have the time. Frankly, you need to have the finances. Um, can you spend that time away from your family? Because it could be an emotional. It depends if you spend a semester or spend a year, or if you just travel. I mean, it would certainly help, but it's certainly not a necessity at all. Lots of people learn English all over the world without traveling to an English country. Um, I mean, yeah, of course you could help, but you can certainly. I mean, and that's just true with any language. Um, any language, you could learn the language without traveling to that country, or without traveling to a country that speaks that language. It might help. It might be useful. Certainly doesn't hurt, but definitely not necessary.
Yeah. And it says here, how long will it take for a person to really learn every necessary element of language to speak it properly?
Depends on the time and effort of the student. Um, I've seen students that even in a couple of months, they've already reached an intermediate level just through practice and constantly immersing themselves in English, reading, watching TV shows, talking to people, focusing on their grammar or just focusing on their studies. And then other people that could spend a year studying English and they're still at a beginner level. So it really just depends on the time and effort. Some people like to say, "Oh, I don't have the time," but it sounds like they just didn't make it a priority, which is fine. If it's not a priority, it's not. Um, I'm not going to tell anybody, "Oh, you must learn English or you must learn another language." If you'd like to, I'm here. It just depends how much of a priority it is. If it's a high priority, you're probably going to learn a lot quicker. If it's not a top priority, again, that's fine. Maybe there's other things, work, family, school, um, hobbies. There could be other things that you have as a priority. In which case, that's fine. That just means that learning that second language, whatever it might be, is going to come a little bit slower. So it really just depends how much you prioritize it. Um, yeah, I've seen students that can reach an intermediate level in just a couple of months through lots of practice.
Mhm. Very good. And final question, technology and education. Do you think that these two elements, let's say, are, uh, I mean, um, the integration of these two elements, let's say, are uh, actually is a good idea or bad idea? I mean, useful or harmful?
I'm relatively old school when it comes to teaching English. The only technology I really use, okay, so nowadays we're doing a lot more online classes, given the current situation throughout the world. So we're doing more online classes, in which case I'm using technology a lot. But when I teach in the classroom, the only time I really use technology is when I turn on the TV screen. I mentioned that I play videos for my class sometimes, short clips from TV shows, what have you. That's really the only time I use technology. Maybe once in a while, I have a couple of PowerPoints, but they're more kind of like interactive games that I play, like a vocabulary game um, that I would have to use a PowerPoint for. That's relatively rare. I usually use the whiteboard. I use a lot of handouts, paper handouts, um, or I just have them more conversation style. So I don't use a whole lot of technology when I'm in the classroom. Um, I mean, I'm sure it does have benefits, but I'm a little more old school when it comes to um, teaching English, with a few exceptions. So, um, yeah, I've heard that you really got to more integrate technology a little more. Um, I don't think it's necessary, so I don't necessarily think it's harmful. I'm sure it's useful, not 100% necessary. I don't. I guess I wouldn't say it's harmful if it's educational.
Okay,
All right.
cool.
Well, that would be my thoughts on that.
Mhm. Very nice. Okay, teacher Michael, thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really cool. The answers were really nice, actually. Okay, so nice to meet you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure and nice to meet you finally after the little mix up yesterday. But
No problem. That is okay. That's all right.
all right. Goodbye. Pleasure meeting you, Mason.
Thank
All
you
right.
very
Have a good
much.
night.
Thank you very much. Take care of
Oh,
yourself.
you are welcome. Thank you. Bye.